Right. So in the previous session, we have discussed about the architecture part. As far as the architecture itself is concerned, like single tier architecture, two tier, three tier architecture and all. And at the same time, we have discussed even about business architecture, etc. And today, we are discussing about the importance of database management system, followed by the basics of structured query language, what exactly SQL is, right? So what are the different things will be there in SQL, all that. So you can see over here. So when we see any application, yesterday, as I mentioned you, there are three layers. One is presentation layer, second is business or logic layer, and the third one is called data layer. These are the three different layers will be there in any project. So whenever we are working on these three layers, the last one is called data layer, right? That's what I said, right? So wherein here we create different database servers, all that. Either it can be database, can be anything, like it can be Oracle, it can be SQL Server, it can be of anything, right? So we need to have a database, creation of database tables where whatever the data are we presenting, so the data will be stored in the database so that we can retrieve when and wherever it is required. So here you can see here, this is where generally you can see here, there are developers. So these developers will write different SQL queries and all, wherein it will be connecting to the database management system. Because database management system is something essentially important for any application when we are performing, because there are lots of data which will be transformed to the system, wherein this is where generally we call it as this database engine, right? DBMS engine will be there, where in this DBMS engine, where whatever the data are we mentioning, so this data has to be stored in that subsequently. So hence database management system is something essentially important to store all the data and all everything in this. From there, it will move on to the data storage. From there, it will connect to the server. So a user, whoever wants to work with the database, they need to connect this database management system through SQL. This is where you can see here, whatever the connectivity they do, this for that they have to do SQL, because SQL is a query language, because there are different languages we see in the field of IT. One is about markup languages, which is called HTML, all that. So these markup languages are used to prepare user interfaces, etc. Second is a programming language. Programming language majorly used to write code, right? So Java, C, C++, all these were considered as programming languages. The third one about modeling language, whatever the human diagrams do we prepare, all these are comes under modeling languages. And the fourth one is called query language. Query language, whatever the SQL are we talking about, this SQL, which stands for structured query language, where we database team has to write some queries. Structured query language, they write different queries and all that, wherein it will be there in the query language processor by implementing this parsers, optimizers, all that, wherein this will be connecting to the database engine, where all this information has to be stored in the physical database. This is where generally these servers and all everything come into picture. So from the server, whatever the information you want to extract, for example, you want to generate reports, whatever the reports are required and all everything. If you want to generate any kind of reports, or if you want to generate any statements, right? So if you want to edit the data, right? So all these things, there are some queries we have to write. So for that, there is a query language which normally we use. What structure query language is what generally we are using. So now I'm going to discuss about what exactly SQL is all about and why SQL is being used. So before I'm getting into that, let me explain you what there are few things which you have to be known with, right? So these are the agenda points I'm going to discuss in today's session. So what SQL is all about, why structured query language is required, and how and where it is being used, followed by the kind of tools are we going to use, all that. Now, if you can see here, SQL, which stands for Structured Query Language, which is a query language. It's a programming of query language which communicates with the database. Because as I told you a couple of times, some time back, even database is the one which will be stored all the information, and what is the information you want to retrieve from the database. So this is what it is being used for. So if you want to retrieve the data from the database, prior to that, you have to create some data tables where we have to store the data. So whenever we are storing the data, we have to retrieve the data first. If you want to retrieve the data, query languages is what generally we have to write. This is what generally SQL stands for, which stands for Structured Query Language. So these structured query languages are the one which communicates with the different databases. Whatever the information we want to retrieve, everything will be done over here. So the major reason of structured query language which will be used by us, which will be used to store the data, because n number of data as part of the project we do. For example, in reference to the loan management system, there are a lot of data relating to the users. Customers will be stored. At the same time, not only storage, we have to retrieve the data even. Whatever the data we have and all that has to be retrieved and managed. At the same time, there is a possibility where we might require to manipulate the data within the database system. For example, if you want to edit the data, right? So maybe you want to update a contact phone number of a person, all right? Or if you want to edit the communication address, right? Postal address, etc. Right? So all these things, so that every thing, whatever we want to do, there are some commands which normally we use. This is all part of structured query language. Now, when it comes to the SQL part, how are we going to use this, right? So what are all and how generally structured query language is being used, right? So this is what we need to know. So generally when we talk about SQL, it uses set of different keywords which will be used to retrieve the data from the databases. Normally these keywords and all everything are called statements, because there are some jargons and terminologies especially we have to understand, because these are all we call it as statements. Statements are the one which normally we use to retrieve the data when and wherever it is needed, right? So hence these are all the keywords which normally we call it as statements are all about. So because different keyword sets are we using to retrieve the data, and these are all we call it as statements. Now, when we talk about the databases and all, these are the different databases we have. As in the beginning, I told you, which is called Relational Database Management System, which is called RDBMS, right? So DBMS is a database management system. RDBMS is a relational database management system. So followed by relational database management system, of course, there are different queries called NoSQL, Cloud, Time Series. So all these informations which are available, especially whenever we are creating the databases, etc., all this. Now, what was the detailed part of SQL, right? So why SQL are we using and what exactly it is being used for? SQL is the one which allows us to query the database because, as I already mentioned it, because we have to write multiple queries, especially in SQL, wherein if you want to retrieve any data from the databases, etc. So these queries are being used for. Normally, these queries will be providing a CRUD functionality. This CRUD functionality as follows. CRUD is a functionality which will be used in SQL, wherein create is one thing which normally we have to use. Create is the first one we have to use here. Create is a functionality. So followed by the create functionality, next read functionality, update followed by delete. These are the four different functionalities will be there under SQL. So SQL provides these things. So one is about create, second is read, third is update, fourth is delete. So these are the four functionalities we require and we have. Again repeating, create, read, update, delete, right? So these are the four functionalities which normally we will be using in SQL provides. Now, when we are trying to understand about SQL types, these are the different types of SQLs do we have. The first one is called DDL, which is called data definition language. Means if you want to define the data, whatever the definition of data are we going to use and all. So this is where generally DDL comes into picture. So DDL is the one which is called the first one, which is used as data definition language, whatever the data to be defined with and whatever the data we want to mention, all that stuff, right? So this is where generally this DDL come into picture, which is called data definition language. Majorly this definition language majorly focuses on majorly focusing on the data which consists of the SQL commands which can be used to define the database schema and all that. Majorly, it simply deals with the description of the database schemes which are being used to create and modify the structure of the database objects in the database. At the same time, DDL is also create SQL commands which are used to create, modify, delete, right? So database structures, all that. But do remember, whenever we are working on the DDL part in reference to the SQL commands which are used to create, modify, and delete, these are all being used for the database structures, and this is not relating to the data part. But DDL language, where these are the commands normally not being used by a general users and all, which should be accessed for the database applications and all everything. Now, when it comes to DDL in reference to the commands, there are different commands we use. Of course, I'll be explaining those commands in the coming video, but anyway, coming session, coming time. But anyway, let me explain you on a high level note. Wherein the first one under DDL is called create, which is this is a command which majorly used to create database or it objects like tables, index functions, views, storage, procedures, triggers, right? So all these things are being used under this create command. This is all, please do remember, this is all part of DDL. Next is a command which is called drop command. This command used to delete objects from the database, whatever is needed. Followed by alter, which is being used to structure the database. To alter the structure of the database and all, alter command is being used. Next, truncate is a command which is used to remove all the records from the table, including spaces, allocating of records, which are removed, all that. Next, when we talk about comment, this is being used to add comments to the data dictionary, followed by rename. Means if you want to use to rename any object with the existing in the database and all everything. So this rename command is being used. So these are all the things which are commands which normally we use whenever we are working on DDL, which is called definition data definition language. Right. So if you are using DDL, data definition language and all, so all these things are being used here. Now the second one about data manipulation language. Data manipulation language majorly deals with manipulation of data, which is present in the database, belongs to database manipulation language or DML, includes most of the SQL statements, what are all available here. At the same time, these are all the components of SQL statement that controls access to the data and to the database. Basically, this data manipulation language majorly use the commands called insert, update, delete, log, all that, right? So, for example, insert is a command which is used to insert the data to the table, which is important because inserting the data is one of the key and prominent element whenever we are working on the application. So we have to, if you want to insert the data to the table, insert command is being used. At the same time, we use a command called update, which majorly used to update existing data within a table, followed by a command called delete, which used to delete records from the database table. So the next one is called lock, right? So table control concurrencies, right? So at the same time, call a PL SQL or Java subprograms, right? So all these things are being used under data manipulation language. At the same time, even explain plan and all, everything will also be used, which majorly describes the access paths to the data. All these things are comes under DML, which is called data manipulation language. So these are the commands which normally we use under DML part. This is what generally DML stands for. So the next one about DCL, you can see here, data control language. This data control language, different commands we use in the data control language, which is called grant or revoke, right? So which majorly deals with the because if you want to control any kind of rights or permissions, right? So all these things further, generally this data control language is being used. So under SQL, right? For example, grant, right? So this is a command which normally we use to give users access privileges to the database, right? So because if there is an administrator, apart from the administrator, if anybody wants, we want to give permissions and all everything, this grant is what generally it's being used. Next was revoke. This is a command which withdraws the user access privileges, which are given by the using the grant command, all that. So this is all something which normally we use for revoke. The next command is called TCL, which is called a transaction control language. This transaction control language, whatever the transaction groups or a set of tasks into the single execution unit, wherein the each transaction begins with the specific tasks, and then with when all the tasks in the groups are successfully completed, this TCL language is being used. But normally it's transactions, when you try to understand the transactions and all, usually this will be only of two results. Either it can be a success or a failure. So whatever the TCL commands which normally we will be using, these are all used to control the execution of a transaction, whatever the transaction we are performing. Let's say, for example, when we have taken a loan management system, there is a transaction of loan sanction process or something we are performing. Wherein to control that, generally these TCL commands are being used, like begin, commit, all that, right? So begin is the one which will be used to open the transaction. Whereas when it comes to commit, commit is a transaction which will be used as commit. or else rollback, right? So rollbacks are the transactions which will be used. For example, if you have got any queries, right? So any errors which was occurred in the data. So to do that, generally this rollback is what generally the query which is being used. Along with this, of course, we have one more called save point, which sets a save point within a transaction. So all these things are being used under TCL, right? So this is what generally we call it as transaction control language. And last but not least, which is called DQL, which is called data query language. Generally, these are the statements which majorly used for performing queries on the data within the schema objects. And the major purpose of data query language is to get some schemas relationship based on the queries passed, all that. At the same time, we also can define DQL, which is a component of SQL statements, which allows getting data from the database and imposing orders upon it, all that. Majorly, when it comes to DQL part, in reference to the data query languages and all, it includes different statements, as I mentioned in the earlier ones, as called as select statement, right? So all that, because select is a statement or a command which allows getting the data out of the database to perform operations within it. Because if you want to select any particular information from the system, right? So wherein if you want to have any report generations or something like, so all these things. So for that purpose, generally the select command is being used. So the one of the major command which we use in DQL is called select, right? So which used to retrieve the data from the database, all that, right? So these are the different type of commands which normally we have. These are all the things like select, extracting from the database, we call it as select command. Whereas when it comes to update command, updating the data in the database, all that. At the same time, delete is a command which will be used to delete the data from the database. Next, insert is a command which will be inserted new data into the database. Creation is to create a database and all that. Alter is to modify if there is any something of that sort, right? So these are the commands which, of course, some time back I have explained it. I've just shown you in a diagrammatical way. So of course, explanation I have given, but commands I'm showing you, right? So when it comes to DDL and all, definition, right? So wherein to create, drop, alter, truncate, all that. Manipulation language, wherein to insert, update, delete, call, explain, call, all that. TCL, which majorly focuses on commit, save point, rollback, set transactions, set constraints, all that. Data query language, which is called DQL, which will be used for selection of particular data. And control language is to provide grant of permissions of database to access by someone, whoever are we authorized to provide, or else to revoke or something like. This is all something. These are all different SQL commands. One must be required. Of course, we don't require everything because DQL is one of the key element which is required. DQL, DDL, DML, right? So these are few things, right? So not all the commands are required. Depends on the kind of role. Being a business analyst, whenever we are performing, depends on the kind of role as well as the need in reference to the organization. Project to project, there are few commands which are required for people to understand. Not, I don't say that everything relating to SQL in detail is required for a business analyst role, right? So there are few commands which are required. That is what is needed. So this is how generally the query processing happens. Like this is how generally query processing happens. A structured query language where it will be connected to the parsers and as well as translators, wherein it connects to the optimizer, where what are the different database catalogs we prepare by creating some database tables and all that. So followed by this, we will be using this execution engine finally this will be landed up with some data, whatever we are working on and all that, right? So this is how generally the structured query languages, importance of structured query language, especially in reference to the mm, application whenever we are working, being a business analyst, especially being a BA, whenever we are working on. Of course, it's not only for a business analyst, people who are working in different roles in the field of IT, either people who are from the database administration or someone, one should be knowing about this knowing about SQL, of course, because nowadays, especially as far as the role of a business analyst is concerned, uh, knowing about SQL, right? So, what are the different types of SQLs do you have? What are the commands? So these are all becoming important, right? So that is why I just discussed about these things to you. So being a people who are into business analysis, I'm talking about, because as you are the business analyst people, it's not only about understanding the requirements. It's not only about providing business solutions, all that, but some sort of knowledge over testing is required. The reason why in the last sessions I have explained you about testing concepts, followed by the different types of applications what we have, like followed by that. Apart from that, we must be knowing about SQL, right? So, structured query language. What are the different types of data definition languages, right? So we have different types of SQL languages, SQL parts like DDL, DML, DCL, TCL, DQL, all that. At the same time, the commands which are related. For example, if you have taken data query language and all, select is a command which will be used to identify the data, right? So this sort of knowledge will be an additional advantage whenever we are working for the role of a business analyst. This is all about the business analyst sessions. I hope you got a clarity, right? So, what business analysis, why business analyst, right? So, what is that we do in reference to the business requirement documents to prepare, BRDs, SRS. At the same time, when it comes to preparing some user stories in Jira, I've taken some loan management system as an example. Hope you know that. At the same time, knowing about this SQL, right? So this is what generally the complete understanding of our business analyst program. Uh, this is what is all about. This is all about session. If you have any queries, you please take today's time. So officially, I'm going to end the sessions today. Today, the session is closed officially. I'm closing the batch. I'm trying. I'll be giving you 2-3 days time between. Right? So if you want, right, so you can take 3 days time or 2-3 days time. I'll just overview, right? So overview the business analyst, what exactly BA do, right? So again, overall understanding over BA one more time, right? So any queries and all everything by taking pause break, right? So for 3 days, I'll give you time. So just go through that. If you have any questions, you can come across wherein whatever the assignments, corrections and all everything will be done that time. I'll tell you where the corrections were and all everything. Followed by this material is there for business analyst that also will be shared with you. So there is a material relating to business analysis material which was prepared by me, some of my material and others, all that, right? So there was material for BA. So that also I'll be sharing to you. You can go through that so that all these are helpful to you to enrich your skills in the field of business analysis, all that. So this is all about the sessions of BA. I hope you got a clarity over. So what exactly BA, what is that they do, etc. All that. This is all about today's session. Thank you. All the best for all your future endeavors. See you then. Bye.